Hi, I'm going to spend a few moments just describing to you who Easyread is for, how it works, and what's involved from your side of things. So the first thing is, who is Easyread for? I mean, we need to start with the great news is that literacy levels in schools has improved enormously over the last 15, 20 years, to the degree where the number of children showing difficulty has more than halved in that time. So that's fantastic news. But it's interesting that we are left with still children showing difficulties, and I'm sure you've been familiar with that. And of course the thing to understand with that is that there is a reason why English is so hard to learn to read, particularly in comparison to the other European languages. We always struggle on the league tables, but that's because English is different to particularly Spanish, Italian and German, and even French, but a little bit less so with French. But nonetheless, the key problem is that we have so many graphemes. We have over 1,200 graphemes for our 70-odd sounds. That's a heck of a lot more than something like Italian and Spanish, where you're talking about 30 or 40 of each. And that is the cause of the difficulty. And that is also the root, we find, of the difficulty for some of the children. They lie in the children still struggling to read have two main groups. The first, and by far the largest, are bright children who have a natural tendency towards visual learning and visual memorization of words as they try to read. And of course that can work quite well in the early stages in reception in year one, but as the text gets more complex it gets steadily harder. And if they don't manage to do the switch to a decoding process, then they get stuck on a plateau where the more they try to memorize, the harder the whole thing seems to get. So Easyread is very much set up for that group to guide them away from this. They've already been introduced to phonics usually and have often been extremely well taught. It's just that they've had the facility, they've had the intelligence, available to them to shortcut that process, and that's what's got them into difficulty. The second group is children who actually have other, sometimes physiological reasons for reading difficulty, and the biggest of those is eye tracking difficulty. It's something which we see very clearly during the course when we switch from presenting single words to presenting sentences to them. And at that stage some children will suddenly have difficulty having not shown any before. And we have a very simple exercise for them to do, which has always cleared that up in our experience. Okay, so how does Easyread work? The basis to Easyread is what we call guided phonetic reading. It has a phonic base, but you will have found that teaching phonics as a set of rules can be very challenging, particularly for some children. And the reason is that there are so many potential rules and so many exceptions to each of those rules. So we approach it for those children in a slightly different way. What we're doing is giving them the facility to walk through the decoding process routinely, day by day, doing a short session of this guided phonetic reading. And we use imagery to help them. So the text is presented with the imagery above, and therefore as they go through each word, they will either be able to decode it unaided, or particularly if it's a very irregular word, they'll get stuck. At that stage the imagery will guide them back onto the right track, and so you get a classic word like was, which confuses so many children. When they read that and they go was and it doesn't make any sense, they can look up above the word, they see the octopus above the A instead of the ants, and they see the zooto above the S instead of the snake, and so they can get the idea that it's was instead of was. And that is the basic principle that we use, and by giving them a successful short session of reading each day, we find that their skill builds up week by week, month by month, And usually after about 3 months you start to see it really impacting their normal reading, and at the sort of 5 to 6 month point it will also start to really impact their spelling. Good spelling is based on how you read, because as you read in that phonetic way, you're building up what we call a letter pattern map in your cortex, which is linking letter patterns seen within the text to potential sounds that might be representing. And as you build that up for the decoding process, eventually you can start to use it for the encoding process, which is spelling and writing. And so eventually that comes through on that side as well. Okay, so what's involved from your side? The first thing is the children have to be able to have internet access to be able to do the lessons. All our lessons run on the internet. They last about 5 to 15 minutes, and so every child involved in Easyread needs to be able to have that access to the internet, ideally at least 4 or 5 times a week. And they can do that from school, but they can also do that from home, potentially if you've got home support for what you're trying to do. However, it is not designed to be an unassisted system. We definitely need an enthusiast within the school to be monitoring the process, and particularly over the first 3 or 4 weeks for every child, they need to be quite closely involved in those lessons. And so the reality is that it needs somebody to be able to devote an average of about 10 minutes per child per day to check that they understand the lesson, that they to help them through any lesson that they're struggling with, and to feed back to us any information on difficulties that they've seen. And with time, with those interactions, that enthusiast within the school will build up experience of the possible issues and how to deal with them. But of course that comes to the third element of what's involved is our support. We're very much here as a resource for you to make sure everything goes the right way for the child. So if you have any questions, do please get in touch. We're here to help in every way we can. We can set up a trial account for the school to see how it goes. We have a free school resources area which you can use as well. And so we very much hope that we can start to work together on this and push the literacy rate up towards the high 90s, which is really what, of course, we all want. I look forward to being in touch.